Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm so excited to introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Andy Doran. He's one of our WGU faculty members. As a self-described and experienced global citizen, he has now settled in Eastern Pennsylvania, where he's been over the last 20 years. And with that and his experience here, he brings a wide range of experiences, both here in the U.S. and overseas, with a passion for language, culture, and learning. It drew him to find experiences overseas in his college days, where he worked in several countries, Europe, Asia, and almost 8 years in Japan. So with that, he's had over 30 years. He's taught ESL in Japan. He's worked for international companies on 3 continents, and now is and has been a college instructor. So with that, Dr. Doran, I will pass it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. Bonnie, I want to thank you and Career Services and whoever else is involved. Can't think of everybody right now, but for allowing me to have this presentation this evening. I'm excited to maybe meet some folks and talk about working internationally. And of course, without further ado, I have some slides here, maybe a dozen or so. I'm going to keep things moving. I am from New York originally, so I like to talk fast, and so I'm intentionally slowing down right now. But we'll keep the pace pretty fast, and try to keep things interesting, right? Along with the title there, do you have what it takes? We'll talk a little bit about that, about cross-cultural concepts and so forth, and kind of just the idea of working internationally from a general standpoint. And as Bonnie had mentioned, I have been now, I'm actually, my 9th anniversary is coming up this weekend, technically. I joined January of 2014. And so I've been a course instructor. Names have changed, a senior instructor now, but instructor for those 9 years, working on many different teams and different courses, but in the business college. For those of you who are, I'm not sure if probably not everybody's from the business college, maybe most of you are, but maybe some of you have also, taken a course of mine, been assigned to me for one of the courses. So again, happy to be here. Thanks for joining. We're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. The first slide really is setting the stage. And feel free to, I guess with the chat, maybe if something I forgot or you have a question, we can kind of sneak that in, and maybe we'll get to it throughout the course of the presentation, right? So setting the stage is really what I wanted to start with here, just for the purposes of the presentation, to make things easier. We're going to define working internationally as someone working outside of the US, right? Because I think most of us are based here, maybe grew up here, maybe not, but we know that there are people from around the world working around the world, so that can get very complicated. So we'll just focus on people maybe based here in the US and trying or working overseas, right? There are many just to set the stage with the terms. There are many terms. Maybe some of you have heard of these already. Expat, assignee, transferee. Expat, the first one there. Expatriate, probably the most common. I think very often used in the US for whatever reason, but there's assignee, transferee, these are very common. Secondee, I think, is more of a British English term. Somebody can maybe comment on that. I've heard that a lot in Europe and in Asia. There's a GloPat, right? Term that I don't know if it's still used, but it was used when I was started to be used when I was in the industry. Somebody who's kind of really a career expatriate, right? A career global worker. Global nomad is another term that's used as well. I didn't write that down, but someone who just bounces from country to country, assignment to assignment, job to job, let's say, in different countries. Okay. There's also, I just threw that out there, third country national. to keep things interesting, if somebody has heard about that, maybe in the chat, if you want to try to define that, I'll get to that in a minute if somebody knows what that is. So feel free to kind of test out your skills in that area. There's lots of different ways to go overseas for work, right? There's business travel, probably the most common. You go overseas for a few days, week or two, whatever. There's short term. That's usually defined as a few months to maybe up to 12 months, I guess is still the standard definition. Anything more than that is long term, okay? And last but not least, the field is continually changing, really based on organizational and company needs, right? If we're talking about from a business standpoint, obviously, if you're going, I didn't make a special note of that, but if you are, and this is definitely a trend for the last, especially during the pandemic and even before, if you have portable skills, whatever they may be, right, you can theoretically work on the beach in Maui or some other country, wherever it is, and do your work remotely, right, from a different country. So that has definitely been a trend these days, and of course, if you don't have to be sponsored by a company, organization to work overseas, you can pack up and find work yourself, whatever it is, teach English. There are a lot of different opportunities, right? So probably the primary though is still working with a company, right? In most countries, you still need to work on the visa thing to work there legally, have some kind of documentation, and so that's most easily done through obviously employment. So I think that makes sense. Going back to, I saw some things come up in the chat as far as the third country, and I'm just going to quickly go through here. So I think we got some working for a third. Yeah, so basically, I think we got some folks who know what that is. So really, if I'll just make something up, if it's an American U.S. national working for a German company in Japan, right? That's kind of a third company. That's the definition that I know it may have changed. There may be some other variations of that, but that is how I would define that. Okay, so and as we go on to the next, as I talk about a little bit about myself, just maybe a show of hands, if just wanted to find out if people right now are working overseas or have worked abroad. It would be nice to know how many folks joining us today fit that category. Okay, so if you want to, I think there's a digital hand to raise somehow, right? So try to work on that. I just quickly about myself, I mentioned about working now with WGU for 9 years. I grew up in New York City, immigrant parents, speaking German, actually, German English mix, kind of the immigrant household. Grandparents were upstairs. That was my world. So different ways of thinking. Everybody had an accent that I knew, except people I kind of, well, even some that I went to school with. So it was a kind of a different, maybe I don't want to say atypical, but maybe typical for an immigrant population in New York, for example, right? It was population, I think, changes every 10 years. 8 million people come and go every 10 years. That's what I read a while ago. So that's a little bit about my background. Obviously, different way of thinking and looking at the world, and so that got me interested in international studies, studying abroad, working abroad, which I did. Obviously, going back, unfortunately or not, a couple of decades now or more, but had a great opportunity, opportunities, study, live in Europe, Japan, travel different countries in Asia and Europe for almost a decade in total. So really interested, learned a lot, studied some languages, did, work in international assignments field, international relocation field, where I got a lot of my knowledge about working with companies, global companies, human resources departments, putting together programs for expatriates, transferees, people, working in different countries and so forth. So a little bit about myself there, okay? we are going to move on. I just wanted to see, is there a way to tell how many digital hands came up?
I saw a couple. It doesn't give us an
Okay,
exact number, but I
gotcha.
definitely saw a couple. And then Jessica, who's in the room, said she was born in Mexico, live in US, and has
Great.
worked in China, Japan, and Korea. So
Very good.
a
Hey,
few.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm jealous. Good. A few countries I never got to Korea, even though I was so close. It didn't work out for various reasons, but yeah, great. So moving forward, okay, and so maybe the majority of you are looking to possibly work overseas, right? In some capacity, travel overseas. And so the next slide, we're gonna talk about, if I can get it to move here, okay. We're gonna talk about the advantages, disadvantages, or I call them drawbacks. Again, using the chat just to keep things kind of interesting. Can you think of some advantages? Just general, take 30 seconds or so, type in some advantages of working overseas, okay?
We have some great answers coming in. Andy, cost of living, new
Yeah, I
cultural
see that.
experiences,
Yeah,
freedom, mind expansion,
look at
opportunity.
that. Fast
Yeah.
and Furious. Yeah, great, great. Culture. Yeah, good, good. Okay, good. And so, and again, this is by no means comprehensive. I think about 4 or 5 here. I'll just put them out. I'm thinking more of the career side of things. Again, that's based on my background, but obviously that's one of the big things: career growth, development, learning different languages, learning how to work with different cultures and organizations and so forth. So you can just imagine uh, the benefits to that, right? And I call it adventure, right? I think some people mentioned that in the chat. Chance to explore different things, grow as a person, new language, new culture, um, personal family experience. If you have a family, significant other that you're traveling with, obviously that's going to benefit them as well, most likely, right? And just kind of give that exposure to a different way of living. Um, dare I say drawbacks, or what are some things maybe that you would find um, maybe I should put difficult instead of drawback, but what are some possibilities or things that you would think of that could be a negative, okay? Or something that's challenging. Yeah, right, away from home, language, I see things here pop up. Long commute, I like it. Yeah, that's good. That's right. That's right. Long commute back to see the family. Um, if you're really lucky and get a nice plum expatriate assignment, the company will pay for that and a lot more, right? I don't have time to go into all the details, but I've seen some amazing things so far in the world as far as what companies will pay for. But I just don't have the opportunity to go through all that. But yeah, so as I mentioned, you can pack up with a briefcase or suitcase, I should say, or a backpack, and a plane ticket, or you can go in style and get flown and first class, and kids go to international school, whatever you want as far as some rent in certain locations are easily more than the yearly salary of the average salary here in the United States, easily. And so I've seen some interesting things, but there are some drawbacks. So getting back on track, there is cultural shock, right? Good old culture shock. Somebody had mentioned commute back to the family. So you're away from home. You're away from the ties, the family ties, the friends, and so forth, things that you're familiar with, right? And obviously, that's going to be difficult, for almost everybody, I would say. There's environmental changes, different environment, right? From climate to language to scenery and so forth. So that's going to be a potential drawback, meaning that yeah, you get homesick, right? Some culture shock. You have to get used to this new location, right? So loss of contacts. Maybe the most important as far as looking at a disadvantage, just again that those ties with family and friends that you've been so accustomed to. Also on the professional level, this happens very often when people are sent abroad through a company organization. you lose that tie-in with the home office, let's say, right? With your place of work that you maybe you've been used to for many years or even longer. And so obviously you're hopefully growing new, making new contacts in your chosen country, right? Where you're living now or working now. But there's also there could be some um, drawbacks with losing that kind of being forgotten in the home office. Okay, let's put it that way. So things to think about, right? But I think we're going to move on if everybody's okay with that. Um, some of you have seen this. I'm going to get down to some more details as far as do you have what it takes? Some of the cultural context behind living, working overseas. I think this is where it kind of gets interesting. Again, using the chat, or if you didn't mention before, if you have access to a microphone, feel free to, I don't know if that we have time for that, Bonnie, whatever you think is appropriate, but feel free to give some of the top end. So let's just look at this iceberg, right? So what is the key characteristic of an iceberg? Probably most of you have not seen one. I have not seen one. The famous story about the Titanic will kind of maybe give you some ideas, but I believe 80–90% of an iceberg is below the water, right? Below the surface, so you can't see it. And so this kind of iceberg model is very famous in cross-cultural circles. It's been used for many decades. I don't actually know where it came from originally. This is where I found it, and I kind of mentioned the URL down there in the bottom. But again, above the water level are the things that you can see in a culture, right? So maybe again, 30 seconds, type some things in there that are obvious to anybody when you're going to see or exposed to a different culture. What would be some of the things? Okay, I kind of covered them up now, right? Those are things that whatever trapezoids that I made, and they're going to magically disappear in a minute. But I just wanted to give folks, people. It's a little bit more specific to that. Specific, yeah. Food, celebration. Thank you. Language, dress. Very good, very good. Yeah, government. Yeah, I would say that. Nonverbal. Okay, outward appearance. Good, good. I think somebody did mention food, right? So those are the things that are kind of obvious, right? Good, good. So I think this kind of makes sense, right? So dress, the literature, laws, I guess government would work as well. Architecture, right? I don't know if anybody mentioned that. The building, right? The style of the buildings. Obviously, the climate also comes into play in that aspect, but the language, yeah, holidays, food, etiquette, heroes, things that are kind of obvious that you can see if you're there and spend some time and are interested in finding out more. So that's kind of the not tip of the iceberg, but or maybe the tip of the iceberg, right? I think that's how you call it. So the top of the iceberg the part that you can see. And so as with the the infamous Titanic story, what happened, right? They saw the iceberg, and before you know it, they hit the iceberg because they didn't see it, right, in the dark. And again, this was 1912, so they didn't have all the bells and whistles that we have now. And so, kind of the metaphor is, right, things that you can't see maybe will trip you up, right, or hurt you even more. So, if you want us, again, 30 seconds, go into chat. What are some of the hidden things, right? These are a little bit more difficult, possibly. Maybe not so obvious. So maybe put those in chat.
We have some great answers, Andy.
Yeah.
We have racism, gender norms, family dynamics, different disability laws, colonialism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Collectivist versus individualist culture.
We'll get to that as well. Corrupt police. Yeah, so hopefully not, but yeah, there's a lot of different things out there with different countries depending on stages of development and so forth, and some of the values, and we'll get into that in a couple of slides. But yeah, but you can see their values, traditions, beliefs. I would say religion as well in certain, yeah, I guess that comes into, there's outward parts of religion. You can see the architecture, you can see the places of worship and so forth. But obviously behind the philosophy, the beliefs, a little bit more difficult, right? Those are things that you really maybe will never learn totally, but obviously can learn a lot if you start to know the language and spend some time there and have friends and talk with people and so forth, right? So these are some of the things, again, not so obvious, okay? So the iceberg model, while I like it, I think, the top, maybe it's not the most accurate, as far as there's a lot of things you can learn from outward signs. There's quite a lot, and as you get deeper, it's going to take some more time. And as I mentioned, the more you learn about those things, the better you'll understand the culture and the society you're living in. But you probably never, unless you kind of grow up there and spend your whole life there, you'll never learn everything. You'll never know everything. The onion model is a different way of looking at things, and kind of also equally valid. Again, the layers of an onion there, right? That doesn't really look like an onion, but I thought it was appropriate as far as they're easy to read. The outward signs, explicit artifacts, products of a society, very similar to this iceberg theory that we just talked about. Things that you can see, right? That outer layer. The middle layer, norms and values, gets a little bit more difficult. Helps people understand how they should behave. And then there's the inner layer, intangible, helpful for problem solving, well interactions with other people, implicit basic assumptions that guide people's behavior, okay? So another way of looking at the cultural context or cross-cultural context, okay? Does that make sense? Before we move on, anybody has any, I guess I should maybe break, we're about 20 minutes into it. If anybody has any questions now or something that is pressing, if not, we can wait till the end. I'm okay with
Everyone,
starting.
if you do, you
Yeah.
just have to come off mute, but you do have that access if you want to pop on mic. If not, the chat is
Great.
totally fine.
Yeah, and thanks for that. And yeah, if there's no pressing questions, I'll move on into, somebody had mentioned something individual. I forgot what it was, individualism, which is, again, as I mentioned, something we'll get to. And that is this slide here with the Hofstede's model, right? Or Geert Hofstede, a little bit more of the Dutch pronunciation. I just looked this up again. I thought it was even more recent. It was in the 70s and 80s, but actually he started this research in the 60s, which I guess I forgot about. I never really read. So late 60s, early 70s, but obviously this was worked on over a period. It still appears in almost every type of literature on, or textbook on cross-cultural concepts or contexts. And so without going into detail, you can read up about Geert Hofstede and this model. And I do want you to do that. Obviously, we don't have time to go into all the details, but just to kind of set the stage for a way of looking at different cultures. What Hofstede did was basically he used data from, and I forgot how he got access to that, but IBM, right, International Business Machines. IBM was the Google, Microsoft, and Apple all rolled into one, right, back in the 60s and 70s and earlier than that. They were the quintessential technology company, pretty much, because they were the only one. Global, he looked at, I think, 50 different countries, at least employees working for IBM in different countries. They were local nationals, not the expatriates coming from one country to the next. And so he did this research, came up with these kind of things that he labeled the cultural dimensions. Okay, low to high. You can see that right there in the diagram. It says strategic planning model used by businesses. Yeah, so it's used pretty much by almost everybody. It's like the first really valuable study on these cross-cultural differences. Okay, again, based on work through IBM. There were different iterations. Other people kind of built upon this, did similar research. The next slide will show one of those different models, kind of similar but a little different. And so you have these different power distance. You have individual versus collectivism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long versus short-term orientation, indulgence. Some of these are kind of, I still recognize them from many, many years ago. Some of them kind of changed over the years, the way they were labeled, for better or for worse. That's fine. But really, it's kind of a way of looking at that, looking at different cultures. So there's also, before I forget, there's a list of different countries, right, on the different spectrums from high to low. But that, again, beyond the spectrum of our presentation today. But please take a look at that. It's very interesting where different countries lie in the, you know, in the cultural dimensions, right? So you can kind of think of US or countries you're familiar with, where they would lie in these different aspects, okay? These different, trying to think of a certain word here. I can't think of it now, but on the paradigm here. So power distance, just I'll pick a few of these. Power distance is really the distance between two people, so to speak, right? So in a lot of Western countries, maybe the US, power sharing, we're more in that spectrum, right? As opposed to distance between, we're kind of more familiar, right? Hey, Joe, how you doing, right? Kind of, you become familiar very, very quickly in general, right? Excuse me. As opposed to, let's say, the authoritarianism spectrum, right? So the power, so there's a large power distance between, I don't know, haves and have-nots, different, you know, layers of society, for example. That would be power distance. Probably the most common that everybody knows is the second one, individualism versus collectivism, right? Individualistic versus collectivist. So you can just imagine some countries that are more on the individual side, where, you know, focus is on the individual person, as opposed to the collectivist, which is more of the group, okay? The group, society in general, okay? So a lot we can talk about Hofstede's model and debate, you know, whether a country, yeah, is it really this and that is, and it's kind of, it's not really a stereotype. It's based on the research, and it's kind of like a tendency. It's a tendency, and you know, that doesn't mean that everybody is going to be labeled as individualistic or collectivist, but in kind of a general sense, countries lie on this paradigm, okay, in certain areas, or more towards one side than the other, okay, if that makes sense. I'm going to pause here for a minute just for some water. Take a look at some of the other areas. Is anybody familiar with this? I'm just curious if people have seen this before. Any comments before we move on to another model that's very well known? Okay, I haven't seen anything, so that's okay. We're going to move forward. I'll take another one. Uncertainty avoidance. Again, so the spectrum, the low is greater innovation, high is less innovation. Uncertainty is just basically that familiarity, is kind of like safety. Okay, this was I've seen this in kind of with different explanations or labels, but kind of, so do you take chances? Are you risk avoidant, or do you take more risks, right? That's really the whole idea: uncertainty avoidance, risk avoidance. So some societies tend to, yeah, people take it, yeah, I'm going to start my own business, I'm going to try to reach my dreams and you know, make the new rocket to Mars, right? So that's kind of the idea of the greater innovation, where the uncertainty avoidance, some cultures are more risk intolerant, right? And so it's like, yeah, I want to work for the big company, I don't want to rock the boat, you know, we're going to be more focused on just, you know, not going to any extremes, right? So that's just another one of the dimensions. And so it's important to know some of these as you move forward, and, you know, maybe your global career, international career, or look into possibilities of working overseas, right? It's good to know these things because they will come up. Take a look at the I know the spelling is pretty interesting, but Fons Trompenaars and Hampton Turner, another very similar in a way to Hofstede, right? They kind of took where he started or continued where he stopped, sort of, right? And this came out, I think, in the more in the 90s, but very similar, this kind of spectrum thing. Okay, take a look at that. Take a 30 seconds, read these, see if you see any ones that are similar, different. Okay, and if you have any comments, feel free to put them in the chat. So if you've noticed, I didn't mention specifically or ask specifically, but if you see individualism, collectivism is kind of the same as Hofstede, right? So that's basically the same. Others are some are similar, but then others are kind of different, right? Universalism, particularism. You can read the explanations there. Achievement, ascription. That one just very briefly. So achievement is based on, okay, did I achieve? Did I work for my place in life, right? Whatever that may be, or is it ascribed to? Was I born into it? Okay, so I think that's kind of almost self-explanatory, right? So some societies where, yeah, it doesn't really matter if I, whatever, made the next rocket ship to Mars. I was born into this family with this background, these titles or whatever. So it's kind of, from this town, and so different view of things, right? And some are very different than, right? If you haven't thought about this ever, then it's like, wow, yeah, that's very interesting. And so it's good to know these different ways of looking at the world, understanding the world, because yeah, there's going to be different. You may be focused on a certain way of viewing the world, your schema, your understanding of how things work. When you go to a country, society, culture that's very different from that, it's going to be very, very shocking, right? That's the whole idea with the culture shock. So you'll have to be open to those different experiences, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. What other can I talk about here? Sequence, time, right? That's a big thing. It's almost like a stereotype, but yeah, there's a lot of differences. I see that all the time. I still see that when I'm coaching folks from my alma mater with different cultural backgrounds. It is very different as far as, okay, let's meet at this time. It's not always that time, right? And so sequential is more of, the idea of in sequence, kind of like more of the Western, let's say, where, okay, 8 o'clock is 8 o'clock, or you try to get there a little bit early. Time is in the sequence. It's a linear thing. It goes, okay, and now it's 8 o'clock, and then it's 9 o'clock, and then we do this, and then we do that. So it's more sequential, right? Synchronic is the idea of more time. It kind of blends together. And there's, past, present, the future. 8 o'clock is not necessarily, doesn't really mean anything, 8 o'clock, right? So that is the thing that Trompenaars, Hampton Turner looked into. I forget now, actually, I forgot to update how they got this information. I know it wasn't IBM, but it was also obviously a large group of folks, and I can't remember now where that came from, but you can look it up, and there's also a list of countries as well, and where they fall into this paradigm, these spectrums here, okay, or spectra, okay. So I think hopefully that was kind of interesting as far as those key areas, right? The last few slides. And now we come to towards the end of the presentation, just a couple more slides here. And this is the one where the concept of do you have what it takes comes into mind. So all that stuff we just talked about, and a lot of stuff that we didn't talk about because we don't have the time. But do you have what it takes? So what do you think, before I reveal the answers, so to speak, again, using the chat, or um, if you have a microphone, want to talk it through, maybe put some things in chat. What do you think? What are some of the qualities, characteristics, the type of personality you would need to live and yeah, work successfully overseas? Okay, I see some stuff coming through already. Flexibility,
Hey,
resilience.
can I
Hi there.
answer? Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Before that, before you came to this slide, I had asked, would the models be something that you would want to include in your classrooms?
The models, yeah, classrooms. Okay. I kind of understand the question, but I would say if it depends on what type of classroom, right? So if you're talking about cross-cultural, global business, working overseas, without a doubt, this is going to come up, right? Those models. Yes, you want to include that and many other things, and have that discussion. It's a great way of opening discussion on different cultures and so forth, and views on how things work, right? If you're used to certain way of doing things or acting, or yeah, this is how we do it. Um, that's not how other people do it, right? Because obviously for many reasons. So hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, to answer your question, definitely you would do that. Obviously, in yeah, a subject that doesn't really have anything to do with cross-cultural, business, probably not. But anything having to do with international studies and so forth, I would definitely include that. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yes.
Good, good, good. Um, and so, yeah, and so I saw a lot of things, some things I missed, but I think we had a lot of good and similar answers, right? So I'm just going to kind of spread these out on the slide. There's no rhyme or reason or, level of this is more important than the other thing. I just kind of put them out there based on things that I've known for many years, things that I've researched. I have some URLs in the next slide where you can explore this more. But hey, you can look this up pretty easily, just like the Trump and Nars model, Hampton Turner, um, Hofstede model, cultural dimensions. Read up about that, so on and so forth. So any of this, does any of this, is any of this surprising? These things that I put, I think a lot of you mentioned them or similar things, right? So do you see any common themes? Just to quickly, and I'm not going to spend that much time on any of these. Yeah, I think somebody just said be a good guest. Yeah, right. So, you know, probably I want to say almost, I shouldn't, but I'm going to say almost common sense, right? If you have a fixed mindset as opposed to a growth mindset, probably working overseas is not for you. I'll just tell you that right now, because you're going to be faced with, unless it's a culture that's very, very similar, okay? Um, it might be a lot easier, but if you're talking about someplace that's very, very different on the spectrum, on the Trump and Nars and Hofstede model, on the spectrum, it's going to be a big shock. So you really have to have that flexibility, that sensitivity, resourcefulness, curiosity to learn, openness to different things, adaptability, resilience, right? All these things, emotional maturity, emotional intelligence, kind of, I guess, blend together. We can probably define them more specifically, but all these things would be important, and especially that gray box up top there, the support network, mentor guidance. Remember, I mentioned a few slides ago as far as a drawback. Well, you don't have your friends and maybe family or colleagues to fall back on and to bounce ideas off of. But it's important to keep that up and find a new support network if you're working excuse me, if you're working in a company, an office environment, let's say, building a new mentor relationship, colleagues, I think is very important, but also friends, people that you can, people that have experience, that maybe you've gone through similar things. It's important to have that network available to to learn from, really, to learn and seek guidance from, and just keep up that contact and learn from. I hopefully I'm making sense there. Any questions on these things? Anything that we've maybe forgotten? Because I'm sure there are, but okay. Yeah. I think I'm going to move on if that's okay with everybody, because yeah, we'll probably have some questions. These are some resources. That's where I got some of the prior information we just talked about. I believe, yeah, those are the ones. But you can find that. You can, again, Google it, right? Just don't go on too many paths, but you can definitely find a lot of resources, obviously online. These are some things also that I've, yeah, this is the Hofstede, I think Hofstede, the iceberg model. There are some links on the slides as well below the diagrams that I included. Okay. And last but not least, I'll just mention this. I'm working on my coaching certification through Rutgers, ICF, and I've been doing a lot of teaching, consulting, sort of coaching, advising over the many decades, and so I'm available. Feel free to contact me directly if you are interested in talking about, just in general about working overseas, bouncing some ideas around, or really talking in more depth, this idea of the coaching, finding out, is this for you? Finding out those answers yourself as far as how can I set myself up maybe for success working overseas, finding a job, things like that. I am available just through my WGU work. Feel free to contact me by email. Let me know, obviously, some key details that you were in the session, for example. And of course, yeah, it's free to, if you're, I'm assuming everybody here is either a current student or alumni, and that obviously works no problem. So yeah, so that's really it. If we have any questions, feel free to, I'm sure there are some, and maybe too many to handle, but we'll I think we have some time. And I guess it did take 45 minutes, so a little bit longer based on the kind of interactivity, but we still have time, and be happy to try to answer some questions.
I had a question.
Sure.
Is there, I'm interested in teaching overseas,
Right.
but with with the U.S. government. So
Mhm.
is there like, I guess a starting point, but well, besides getting my degree, that I
Mhm.
should be looking into, or something else I
Yeah.
should be doing in tandem with that?
I have spoken with quite a few people over the years interested in teaching, because that is the English is still in demand pretty much almost everywhere. And if you're a native speaker, yeah, obviously it is a potential. Probably what I would suggest to you, because there are always some specifics involved, and I don't have the answer for you right now, but if you want to contact me and we can maybe set up a session, we can at least talk about it once. Yeah, definitely there's a lot of opportunities there. That's how I started. I'll just say 30 years ago in Japan. It was a different world at that time. Things change constantly as far as where the demand is, the visa situation, the requirements. When I was there, I'll just very briefly mention, if you had a degree from a college, you had enough credential to get a visa in Japan, a 1-year visa. That is not going to be the same right now. It's very different, and it's obviously very different in different countries depending on where you want to head to. And of course, I think you mentioned the U.S. government. That's a whole other area. So you have to start just quickly. Definitely contact me, but I will say, in general, the bar is much, much higher than it was just a couple of decades ago. Okay, so no more BA. I hate to say it, master's, doctorate level, research level as far as language. Of course, there's always opportunities, but again, the more people are interested, the more difficult it may get to find that right position, right? So the more, in this case, the more education have, certification, teaching, so forth, the better it will be for you. So that's a general answer, okay? Any other questions? But again, feel free to reach out, send me an email, and we can maybe set up a time to talk for, half hour or so.
Andy, I do just want to
Yeah.
say, I added a link, depending on what your academics lead you.
Yeah.
There's a great studies, a scholarship program, fellowship program, Fulbright.
Uh-huh.
Fulbrights are great academic awards where you can go and
Right.
study abroad, whether they're 2-year terms or 6-month terms or even 2-week terms. So definitely look at Fulbright. It's a great honor to be a Fulbright recipient, but there are a lot of opportunities, depending on if you weren't ready to go straight into corporate or teaching, that there would be study opportunities. So I just wanted to throw that out there for a couple of the questions.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, that's great. Anybody else?
I had sorry, another question. Do you guys
Sure.
have opportunities about doing student teaching overseas?
That's a question for me, right? Yeah, that's something I wouldn't be necessarily familiar with from a kind of a technical standpoint. Briefly, can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that, the student teaching?
I think, and I think I actually know if you're
Okay,
if you want to do your demonstration teaching, it does have to be in
I
the
see.
domestic United States.
I see. Okay.
So at this point, I know there's conversations, future state of where WG wants to go, but at this time, your DT, your demonstration teaching does have to be in the US.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Bonnie, a question. If you know the answer, great. If not, would like a U.S. territory would be okay, like Guam or something, Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
Commonwealth. Yeah.
Let me ask that question, and I'll also
Okay.
include it in my email. I do know there's some rules and regulations around that. Like we have our servicemen and women that may be in Guam going to WGU,
Mm-hmm.
and they do their DT, but I don't know if there's rules and regs that you have to be like, I know most of them do it on a US air base or naval
Yeah,
base or whatever it is.
because
So
it's
let
technically
me
U.S. to right,
ask.
right.
Yeah, let me ask our field experience senior manager that question, and I'll also put that in the email.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not familiar with like the teaching, certification requirements, but I know Bonnie is more. I will say that one of my degrees, I have a master's in ESL second language through Penn State, and ironically, they teamed up with a university in Puerto Rico, Turabo, which actually changed, the name changed, unfortunately, a few times. They actually has sent teachers to Pennsylvania to work with us. So, and then we got certified, even though I was never a K through 12 instructor, I was able to get a degree through that. So yeah, I was just thinking about opportunities. Any other questions before we maybe wrap it up this evening?
Hi, thank you for providing this information and sharing all
Sure.
of the great resources, both Andy and Bonnie. My question is about being a digital nomad. That's a term
Hmm.
I've seen floating around in recent months, and I'm just wondering if you could share more about what you know about that.
Yeah, so I actually don't know specifically. I don't know too much about that other than because I'm well, without going into details, I'm kind of stuck here in PA right now due to family reasons, but something I would love to do. I know just from reading kind of anecdotally from the news, from the media. Obviously, pandemic has changed a lot of different things, but this idea of a global nomad, there's a lot of certain countries. I couldn't name them specifically, but some pop up more than others as far as being more friendly or open to people, setting up a work operation or working from their country, right? If that makes sense. So if you are adventurous, if you're able to work through a laptop or a computer, let's say, there are many people that do that, especially the more technology focused it is, right? Where you can do things remotely and not have to worry about constantly being in contact with folks and time zones and things. That is something to look into, right? To work in wherever it happens to be. You can name your country. Obviously, to do things legally, right? You need to get that visa. Let's say the visa or the ability or whatever permit to stay in the country for usually I think it's still 90 days as far as a stamp passport. The U.S. you can visit a country a country for about most countries for about 90 days. You can't really work there, but you can visit, I think, it depends on the regulations, but business trips and so forth, but you can't really work there. So there's a number of things. I'll just say that's something you need to look into as far as where you want to work, what their regulations are, as far as where you can work. If it's okay, then you have to figure out what country, and then you really have to, use a lawyer, find out if you're able to live in that country, if you can afford to live in that country, if you're able to, do you have to pay taxes there, or do you, because the U.S. again, global is one of the few countries in the world where you're globally taxed, where you have to file a tax no matter where you live if you want to keep your U.S. citizenship, right? So you always have to file a tax. That doesn't mean you're going to pay any tax, but you have to look at that situation. That's something that you need to work with professionals on, if that makes sense. Okay. But yeah, there are a lot of opportunities. Global nomad, again, very increasing. A lot of things in the media with the pandemic. Hey, and I don't have to. I'm not going to the office. I'm going to live in Portugal and I'm going to work from Lisbon, right? Or something like that, or Costa Rica, something to that effect. And so, good question. I don't know if that helps a little, but yeah, a lot of little technicalities and specifics you have to look into. But by all means, if that's something you or anybody's interested in doing or can do, yeah, try to pursue that further. Bonnie, was there any pressing question that you saw that we could wrap up with?
I'm not seeing any at the
Okay.
moment. I think, from your experience, I'll ask kind of a question, and maybe it's the final
Sure.
question to wrap us up. But when you think to your experience abroad, what were those things that made you a standout candidate? What were those skills? What were those qualifications? Because I think from the
Wow.
student
Yeah.
perspective,
Yeah.
how do these students market themselves? What makes them stand out
Yeah.
as a potential candidate?
And that's a very great question, and it's a very specific question, I would say, depending on what you. So yeah, if you want to do some teaching, right? That's very different than becoming, let's say, a manager in a Fortune 500 company, or a, you know, a programmer that's, again, living on the beach in whatever, in Spain somewhere, and writing code or something. So it really depends. It's specific to the industry that you want to work in, I would say. Very important. Obviously, education, ability to do the work. For myself, it was a lot of those things. Again, growing up, just being really passionate, interested in yeah, I got my degree, you know, kind of traditional. I went to college after high school, and I did very well. I loved studying. Came very easy. I studied, you know, German, Japanese, French, whatever. It was just something I wanted to do. It was great. It was great. And so you know, that passionate interest is something that obviously companies know about, or you know, latch onto, or realize that, hey, this person is, you know, they're trying to speak my language. And so obviously that will have a huge effect on your possibility, your potential as a candidate, right? And you know, being interested in whatever it is you're doing, really showing that passion, and having the education behind you, if that makes sense. So, but again, a lot of different nuances. That's, you know, I think that the easiest way to answer that in this stage. But again, just to emphasize, if you you know, take down my email address there, if you want to reach out, we can see if it makes sense to talk further and get into your specifics, right? Your situation. So, but yeah, thanks for the question. Hopefully that
Yeah.
helps. Yeah.
Yeah, very much. Thank you. And it looks like everyone's, you know, definitely sharing their appreciation for you, Andy. I think it's been a great presentation, very
Great.
informative. Again, for our participants, I am drafting up the email now so that I'll get all the links that I posted. I'll also have Andy's email in there so you can reach out. And then it'll come tomorrow morning with this recording. So you all have access to it. And you know, as Andy said, reach out to him. You'll have links to our services for those resumes if you'd like to work on them. Our office is here to support you both as students and alumni for life. So thank you all for joining. Great conversation, and thank you, Andy, for all of that information. It was super helpful.
Sure. Well, I'm glad had the opportunity, and thanks everybody for joining, and maybe we'll talk with some of you further. So have a great evening.